Welcome to the Van Conen Sessions. Here, it's all things life and music.
I feel that shine through the window. I hear the wind blow through the trees.
Hey guys, welcome to the Van Conen Sessions. This week, Brett and I are going to attempt to take you through the life and times of Mr. Chris Farley, amazing actor, sadly gone too soon. I got Mr. Producer over here laying on the book.
Way too soon.
So I've got a lot to read through, and I hope you'll bear with us. And because it's obviously a short version, I think this book is for those. I don't have the paper cover, but it's the Chris Farley Show, written by his brother Tom Farley Jr. and Tanner Colby. The book is, I highly recommend the book. It is,
Absolutely.
if you're a Chris Farley fan, that is. I mean, it's 350 pages. I probably have 20 pages of notes, which would probably equal 10 total pages maybe out of the book. I'm going to try and read through here. And it lays down Chris's life based on his family, his co-stars, his friends. And he was an amazing guy, and we will get started. And if anybody wants to chime in, Brett will keep an eye on that. And we'll try to just go back and forth a little bit here. It gets pretty, there's a lot of laughter to be had, and it gets to be pretty tear-jerking in the end. So don't hold me to it.
Absolutely. You know what I'm saying.
You know what I'm saying? That's Christopher Crosby Farley was born February 15th, 1964 in Madison, Wisconsin. And unfortunately passed December 18th, 1997 in Chicago, Illinois at 33 years of age. We just missed his passing before Christmas. So we'll start right out into this. Actually, also Chris was one of 5 siblings. A sister named Barbara, Tom Jr., Chris, well, himself, obviously, Kevin and John. His parents were Thomas John Farley and Mary Ann Farley.
Which 2 of his brothers were actually pretty active in the industry too. They would have little scenes with Chris quite often. Now I think was it Tom Jr. who wasn't really the one brother who didn't really get in the limelight at all. But the other 2 and the sister, or the one brother and the sister, they stayed out of that stuff pretty much. And then the other 2 brothers would do movies and skits and stuff. They're also funny.
Right. It's amazing. You'll see as we go through the notes here. The family, they were all very, very much alike in their ways. So this just goes through basically what this book does is it goes through and they interview all the people that he worked with, his family, friends, co-stars. So it just each name, and then they tell a quote or talk a little bit about Chris. So it starts right out with Hamilton Davis. He says one time he did Hound Dog dressed up like Miss Piggy. So that must have been pretty hilarious. His brother John says, with the birth of the VCR, we memorized Animal House, Stripes, Caddyshack, Meatballs, History of the World, High Anxiety, and Blues Brothers. And of course, in my notes, I'm like, sounds like Brett.
Yeah, no, I know, right? Yep.
You remind me of Chris Farley quite a bit in your talent with your well, you can actually imitate him pretty well too, so
Well, I do appreciate that.
right. Tom Farley, his brother, this is great, man. We rolled because I read out loud to Tina a lot just to practice my reading. And now we're reading this part, and we're both rolling. I had to stop and wipe my eyes. So Tom Farley, his brother, says Chris peeing in a cup because he was too lazy to get up and go. He says Mom finds out, and then Dad finds out. Dinner table the next day, as his father reaches over to take a sip of water, Chris says, "You're not going to drink out of that glass, are you?" His dad reacts, "Gee, damn it." Robert Barry. Chris didn't drink until he was a junior, but the minute he did, it was all over. And then another note that side note on my own. Chris would enter rehab several times. On one occasion, he finally entered a halfway house and then went on to give a real motivational speech to a large auditorium at Hazelden, a drug rehabilitation facility in Center City, Minnesota. He'd made it to 1 year, 6 months, and 6 days sober at that time. And then Tom Farley says, we lived in a make-believe world. We were living with the elephant in the room, the literal elephant in the room that no one wanted to talk about. He said, my dad weighed 600 pounds by the time he died. So you can see where Chris gets it from. I don't even know how he had the eating problem that he did with the drugs he did, but that's something we'll talk about.
Right.
Chris graduated high school in the spring of '82 and finished college in 4.5 years. As part of his theater requirement, he took ballet. And you can imagine. Well,
Yeah, I
obviously,
know.
you
You
can,
get some pretty funny visuals on that.
and obviously he was actually very athletic. It's amazing with his as being as overweight as he was, he could do what he. Because if I tried to do them cartwheels like that, I'd probably break in half, man.
Oh yeah,
So
for sure.
there was a place they called the Red House. After moving out of the dorms in college, Chris and a bunch of his rugby pals lived in a big POS house on 19th Street. They called it the Red House. According to most, it was pretty disgusting. Food and clothes everywhere, fruit flies. One of his roommates was a Budweiser rep on campus, so everything in the house was Budweiser, signs and cups everywhere. Every couple of months, Chris' mom and dad would send him a 25-pound summer sausage along with a 25-pound wheel of cheese. There's no more cheese, Gromit.
Nick Guillory says, I've been thinking on what is the elephant in the room, and I think I see something. Hmm. Hmm.
Hmm. Excuse
Hmm.
me? Thanks for chiming in. Uh,
Yeah,
Jim,
thanks for being here, man.
yeah, we appreciate it. Jim Murphy. I have this vivid memory of him, Chris, in his room one day while everybody else was going to class. He sat in this chair with a big red bong, doing bong hits and chugging Robitussin cough syrup back and forth one after another. We had a buddy did that shite, he called it robo tripping. I
Mm.
watched him. You remember Ronnie?
Oh yeah.
Good grief, I'd watch him suck a whole bottle of that down.
He's feeling it, Mr. Krabs.
Oh, he was feeling it all right. In the spring of Chris's senior year, he decided to pull a prank on the ladies in the White House on Kilbourne Street. He lit a cherry smoke bomb and put it on the open windowsill, thinking that the smoke would drive everybody out. It spun off and landed on the couch, eventually catching the house on fire. Ended up costing him 30 hours of community service and delayed him getting his diploma by about 6 months.
Holy shnikes.
Right. Because it was one of those that spins around and took off and went in the window, went in the window and caught the couch on fire. Holy crap.
Oh man.
Joel Maturi. I didn't mention each time a name in here. Some of you will have to either look it up or whether it was a friend, you may recognize the names. Obviously, some you will, some you won't. But some are co-stars, some are producers, some are friends. Joel
The what
Maturi.
not to do list.
Right. Joel Maturi says the motivational speaker is based in part on me, mostly some of my mannerisms, like hiking the pants up, the spreading the legs, and crouching down to get serious. I think the more philosophical side of the character was actually based on his dad, that's pretty cool.
For
Well,
sure.
he does his little thing there on Jay Leno,
Oh, about the drive. Yeah.
right?
About how he starts off real calm and then builds up. Yeah.
Go ahead.
That's no, all right. So yeah, he's kind of explaining to Jay about how he based that character off of his father. You kind of start soft spoken, and I thought I told you kids to go outside and shovel time, and
Right.
just really just end it with a roar. And it kind of you could see it. You could see a little Chris and his dad,
Yep.
getting, oh, holy shnikes, we're on it.
Right.
Yeah.
The guy was
Dad's
hilarious.
upset.
Right. I don't know if I don't know there's anybody funnier than Chris Farley, and as you'll if you follow us through this whole thing, it's you learn his character is what a great person he was, just like Elvis, you know. Uh,
Blippers has arrived late, but thanks for being
ah,
here,
there,
Blippers.
always late. There's pain in my
Always
ass. He's
late.
here, huh? All right. Thanks for
All
showing up.
right.
Chris left for Chicago in June of '87 in pursuit of the comedy institution known as Second City, but was forced to look elsewhere, instead getting his start at a place called Improv Olympic. There he spent over 18 months studying and performing. He auditioned for Second City's touring company in January of '89 and was offered a position. Instead of months or years, Chris joined the main stage ensemble in a matter of weeks. His character was just, he didn't even have to do it. He didn't really study he just could do it. It was natural for him.
Right.
Um, Joe List, Chris was always Boy. He was Boy, right? He was Whale Boy, then Caramel Boy, and of course there was Tommy Boy. OCD, Bob Odenkirk. I cannot express to you how much he licked everything. He'd open his wallet and lick everything inside it, the pictures, the money. He had to lick his shoelaces to tie them. He'd lick his finger and touch the stair, lick the finger, touch the stair, and do it all the way up the staircase. It was totally nuts.
It's so weird seeing, picturing him do that.
Right. I get
And Blipper says she can read the subtitles, so be nice. And Nick Guillory says Improv Olympic sounds like clown college in my brain,
right on.
which I mean, kind of.
Yeah, it's
It kind of is a clown college, I guess.
yeah, and the further we get into it, you'll see all the different actors that
Right.
he worked with. It's really excellent. It really builds a picture of who he was as as a person, not just the actor. Holly Wartell was a good friend of his. We would do charity gigs sometimes where they would pay us $100, which was huge for us. Chris was the only person in the cast who turned down the money. He would always say, "Please keep this and make sure it goes to the people you're helping." Bob Odenkirk, even as Chris's personal troubles began to mount, his professional fortunes only grew. In the spring of '90, Chris was signed by Brillstein Gray was a powerhouse management firm in Beverly Hills. Mark Gravitz, who would manage him for his entire career. Um, Mr. Father Matt Foley. I was in the audience that night when he said, "My name is Matt Foley, and I'm a motivational speaker." The skit was written by Bob Odenkirk. I was probably as red as a beet. I smiled and slid out. I smiled and slid down a little further in my chair. Excuse me. After the show, we went and hung out in a bar for a time. Chris Chris told me he was never going to change the name, that it was always going to be Matt Foley. I'm honored by it still.
Anthony Spade says WT Fudge. Get notified though isn't showing live. Well, welcome in, Anthony. And Philip Fletcher, hey man, says at work, howdy.
Hey Phil, hey guys, thanks for tuning in, man. We appreciate all you. Appreciate all of
Absolutely.
you. SNL. From the day he arrived at SNL, Chris Farley was already suffering uh, comparisons to the other outrageous, larger than life figures in SNL history. John Belushi. When Chris died 7 years later, eerily at the same age as Belushi, those comparisons became gospel. In truth, the two men shared far more differences than similarities. It all began in 1975 when producer Lorne Michaels assembled the original cast of SNL and took to the air live from New York Saturday night. Tom Farley. I remember walking out of Rockefeller Plaza after the first show on our way to the after party. There were all these limos lined up. Chris said, "Wow, look at all these limos. Ain't that something?" Pauses. "I wonder if we can get a cab." "Chris, what do you think these limos are for?" I said. "What do you mean?" "I saw some guy with a clipboard and walked over to him." "Is one of these cars for Chris Farley?" I asked. "Yes, sir," he said, "right over there." "Wow," Chris said. "How did you know that?" "Because that's how it works here." Didn't
How
even
did you know that?
right. He didn't even realize that, hello.
Hello, Haley. Apparently at first it was black and she could only hear us, but now it's working And Jen says she's got a topic we can do, but she doesn't know how we feel about it. Well, throw it at us, whether in direct message or whatever. But
Right.
yes.
Yeah,
Anyway,
absolutely.
hello everybody.
Yeah, thanks. We appreciate all you tuning in. Yeah, we're actually lining things up. Next week we should have on an old friend and vocalist, Tyler Ruski. We're trying to line up
Gonna be a good one.
at this time. Also, I'm in communication with Glenn Brook. If you look her up, Glenn Brook Music. We
Very
hope
talented
we hope
singer.
to have her on, possibly with her band on the 11th. So we'll see how that works out. But in the meantime, I actually spoke with a representative from Michigan. We might actually have him on too. I'm waiting to hear back. So hopefully a lot of things in the future, and hopefully we can get to doing it more when we have more time. In the meantime, Chippendales, Bob Odenkirk. I didn't like the fact that the first thing he became known for was that Chippendales thing, which I hated. Effing lame, weak bullshit. I can't believe anyone liked it enough to put it on the show. From that sketch, he never should have done it. Chris Rock, Chippendales was a weird sketch. I always hated it. The joke of it was basically, we can't hire you because you're fat. Imagine if they'd had me in that sketch and then said at the end, oh, we can't hire you. You're a NIGGER. That was a weird moment in Chris's life. As funny as that sketch was, and as many accolades as he got for it, it's one of the things that killed him. It really is. Something happened right then. We just had we just had fun. There was a lot of McDonald's, a lot of going out to eat, and a lot of watching MTV. We'd watch the musical guests rehearse. Let's run down and see Pearl Jam. We ought to see we got a lot of we got to see a lot of the grunge stuff before it really took off. All those bands made their first appearance on SNL. So pretty sad about the how the Chris Rock and Bob Odenkirk felt about the Chippendales thing, but I get it.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I had seen in interviews also that they talked about that being one of the things that Chris didn't necessarily show himself, that it really tore him up, but they could tell, you know what I mean, that
Right.
it was, and like they had said also that, for his size and his structure, for the dancing he did really damn good. Like,
Yeah,
but obviously the fatty, everyone
right.
laugh at fatty, and
Fatty
Jen
falls
says
down.
Robin Williams, he was my favorite actor. I think we could definitely do a cast on Robin.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, he's got one of my favorites too. He was an amazing person.
Absolutely.
Um, Chris's date, Tom Farley. Somewhere along that first year on the show, Chris started dating Lauren's assistant, this girl named Erin Maroney. It was the first time I'd seen him in a real relationship, ever. David Spade. He flirted with her all the time and it paid off. They started dating. I don't think I ever would have put those two together, but I think she saw through all the other stuff to see that he was a good guy and a fun guy. And his history shows sometimes that's enough. Tom Arnold. Chris was in love with Erin. He talked about her all the time. On a flight back from LA to New York, Chris kept sucking up to Lauren. After 3 or 4 times doing it, this is funny, Erin turned to Chris and said, pace yourself, Tubby. It's a long flight. I think that's why he loved her. A funny woman who's attractive and smart. Now that's what you want. And Chris's character, Tom Meadows. After the first season wrapped in May, we had the we had this party at the restaurant downstairs at Rockefeller Center. A bunch of us went back up to the office for a little after party. Then about 4 in the morning, Farley and I were both leaving at the same time. We were waiting for the elevator, and he said, Timmy, can you believe this is our life? I said, Chris, I think that every day. Then he just grabbed me and he hugged me. He couldn't believe where his life was going. Some of this stuff will really get you, I tell you. I have to hold the tears back sometimes.
Yeah, it is one of those for sure.
Excuse me, guys. Got the froggy in the throat. The addiction. Unfortunately, he was a serious addict. On June 16th, 91, worried that the management at SNL would hear of his drunk on stage incident at Second City. Chris checked himself into the Hazelden Recovery Facility in Center City, Minnesota. It was the first time he sought treatment for his addiction. The doctors and therapists at Hazelden concluded the following about Chris and his addiction, quote, Chris's inclination is to be compliant. Chris has identified that his use with humor and his use of humor serves the function of diverting attention from issues that one may be painful. That it's with humor that his family deals with conflict and pain. Aftercare issues include compulsive overeating, possible obsessive compulsive disorder, and that's pretty obvious if you ask me.
Right.
Diagnosing the problem was easy, but unlocking it and treating it would prove to be a complex proposition indeed. After 28 days, Chris checked out of Hazelden, but the program had accomplished little, and his destructive behaviors quickly resumed.
Haley, yes, Chris was truly a legend, and he was young, 33. I'll be 32, so to put that in perspective,
Yeah, absolutely.
that just blows my mind. Growing up watching him and
Right.
knowing that I'm approaching his age when he passed, is just wow.
Yeah, it really is truly sad, and like I said, and as we get toward the end of his life, there, the addiction just way out of control. Kevin Nealon, I remember seeing him being a little more sweaty in sketches. His moods would change more. When he first showed up, he was that lovable Chris guy. Then you started to see sides of him that were a little more irritated, more impatient. Holly Wartell. He downed a few more of them, and then he looked up at me and sort of lunged at me. Some of this I shortened up, obviously, for time. I stepped aside. This is in his apartment. I stepped aside, but his momentum kept him careening forward, sorry. Now we were about 15 stories up in this high-rise hotel, and the room had these large picture windows that started about 4 feet up, went all the way to the ceiling and ran the whole width of the room. Under the windows was this waist-high radiator. Chris ran smack into the plate glass window and smashed right through it. His body was hanging out at a 90-degree angle, and if not for this radiator had caught him at his waist, he would have crashed right through and fallen to the street below. He hung there for a few seconds, then he lurched back in, and I screamed. His arm was sliced open all the way from his shoulder to his wrist. Oof. That,
That's insane to even think about that. Like,
yeah, how close he came to actually losing his life there because he was drunk and smashed through a window 15 stories up, almost crashed to the ground. David Spade says, I found a bunch of bags of coke and heroin in a drawer in our office. I said, what are these? I didn't even know. He said, get the F out of here. And he kicked me out of our office. Adam came in and asked what was going on. I said, Farley's out of it and there's some shit in there. I don't know what it is. Chris was pretty good with Adam. So Adam said, let me talk to him. Adam went in the office. F you, Sandler, get out of here. Adam came back out and said, that didn't work too good. I said, let's talk to Marcy and see what she can do. Marcy came in and said, where's Chris? Excuse me. Uh, F you, Marcy, she said. I'm telling Lauren. So yeah, he was getting pretty miserable at times there with it.
right. Jen says, if Chris Farley was still here, what do you think he would be in life? I always ask myself that. I think that he would still be doing things with the crew, with him and Adam being so close and Adam still doing so successfully with his movies. I think that he would still be tagging along.
Yeah, I think if he was still here, obviously things would be different because if he were still here, he'd be sober
Right,
and he would be not necessarily a different person, but he wouldn't be. Obviously, the addiction formed a big part of who he was.
right,
Um, Chris was forced to go to rehab at this point, or lose his acting career. Todd Green said, Kevin Cleary and I drove him to the airport. That was really hard. It was right before Christmas, and that was always an important time of year for Chris to be with his friends and his family. No matter where any of us were, we always made it a point to be together in Madison for Christmas. After we said goodbye, he walked over to the gate, and right at the entrance to the jetway, he stopped and looked back at us for a moment. He had this deadly serious expression on his face. He gave us a thumbs up, turned around, and walked onto the plane. Sobriety. For the next 3 years, Chris Farley stayed clean and sober. At Lorne Michaels' behest, he had spent the entire Christmas break at a hardcore lockdown rehab facility in Alabama. Unlike the celebrity resort and spa recovery units of Southern California, this joint was one step above prison, and it was staffed by, in the words of Tom Arnold, a bunch of big black guys who wouldn't take any of Chris's shit, and it worked. As as the hoary cliche goes, Chris was a changed man. He was calmer, more thoughtful, and more focused. He was also funnier. Chris missed the first show of '93, but he was soon back in full swing.
Anthony says, "Hey, how y'all fellas been?" And hey, is David Spade a relative? I don't know, Anthony, but if he is, you might want to get in contact with Sir
Right.
David. I do have his autograph up here with Mr. Sandler.
Oh, nice. Right on.
But yeah.
Yeah, Tom Farley says he was a lot more fun to be around. He was much, much funnier. You could have thoughtful, engaging discussions with him, and he wouldn't get mad or defensive. That was a huge difference from when he was drinking. For Chris, being in recovery was a little like being at camp. That's how he treated it. Make your bed every morning for inspection, that sort of thing. And that carried over once he got out of rehab too. As disgusting a slob as he was before, he was that clean and organized once he got sober. He turned into a neat freak. And David Spade says, I would have to write sketches all week to try and stay alive on the show, and Chris would be written for, so he didn't write a lot or read. So while I was busting my hump, he'd be behind me trying to amuse himself. One night he goes, uh, Davey, turn around. I'm busy, I say. Turn around. Dude, if it's this fat guy in a little coat again, it's not funny anymore. It's not, really? I promise. So I turn around and he's got my Levi's jacket on and he goes, fat guy in a little, give it a chance. And the coat rips, and that's how we ended up putting it on Tommy Boy.
Take it off, Dickhead. I'm serious. Richard, what's that? Oh.
Right, that's great.
Oh.
Norm Macdonald chimes in with what astonished me about Chris was that he could make everyone laugh. He could make a child laugh. He could make an old person laugh, a dumb person, a smart person, a guy who loved him, a guy who hated him. Um, Peggy McGirl. We have a residence. We have a residence, a converted hotel that is now a home for the homeless and the mentally ill. And Chris used to visit a man named Willie. Oh, this is a tearjerker here. Um, Willie was about 70 years old and he had been homeless before coming to our residence. Chris took Willie out to dinner every week and to famous restaurants. Chris treated him as an equal, always. He would take him to Broadway shows, take him out to ball games. If Chris was walking down the street on the way to his office, he'd stop in to see how Willie was doing. Whenever he had to go away for work, he'd send Willie postcards, and whenever he came back, he'd always bring Willie a souvenir. They were friends for over 5 years. Todd Green. On the 1 year anniversary of Chris's death, St. Malachi's was having a memorial mass for him, and I went with Tommy and Kevin Cleary. There was an elderly black man there with a Chicago Bulls hat on. His name was Willie, and he talked about Chris and about the things he had done for him. Kevin, Tommy, and I, we just looked at each other. We had no idea. The room spoke. The man spoke a while longer. Then he started to break down crying. He said, this is the last thing Chris ever gave me, and I really miss him. Oh boy,
Right.
Tommy Boy, Father Tom Gannon. People always ask me what kind of guy Chris Farley was, and I say, go and see Tommy Boy. That's Chris Farley.
That's what I was gonna say. If you hadn't had that, I was gonna have to bring that up. Um, for anyone, who is obviously watching this, I'm sure that you have seen Tommy Boy. And if you want to know how Chris was in real life, if that's your closest bet to seeing it, didn't really have to act much for that one. Just
Right. Michael Ewing, associate producer. Tommy Boy at that point was called Billy the Third, a Midwestern. It was changed because Billy Madison was being shot at the same time.
Yep.
Bob
Which
Weiss.
Chris was also in for a short period of time. Did a little cameo.
Yeah, Bob Weiss. It was rough, but the beautiful thing in Tommy Boy, of course, is the chemistry between Chris and David Spade. It wasn't like, hey, let's invent a comedy team. It's not that easy. There was just a hunch that their personal relationship would really pay off, and it did. A lot of what you see in that movie is why they really were. It's who they really were. We started filming, and I was like, from this is funny. They just hit me, run after home run. Lauren Michaels, I always said that while making the movies, Chris would put on 30 pounds and David would lose 30 pounds. But no matter what, the amount of weight in the room stayed the same. Chris would get bigger, and you'd be saying, "Get Spade a banana," because he was wasting away.
Get
Get him
Spade a
a
banana,
get
man.
Spade a banana. Owen and Rob Lowe. Rob Lowe says Chris and David were like an old married couple. They could be so petty with each other in ways that were so funny and unbelievable that you were never really sure when it was an act, which it often was, and when it crossed over to become real, which it often did. So their little spats, was kind of part of the acting.
Right.
It was pretty funny.
Anthony Spade says awesome story. Absolutely. There's a lot of them in that book. Like I said, like we said,
Yeah, there's we still got quite a ways to go for
more,
you
yeah,
for
more to
you
go.
guys that are gonna stick around. 'Cause
Mr. Producer, calm down over
oh,
there. I see
there,
you
yeah.
stretching out.
He's like, yeah, I did the homework. Now it's time for you to read it.
It's
David
time for
Spade
you to
says
read it.
he trusted me. He also thought I was smart, whether I am or not. He would always ask my advice on a million things, and I would just try and help him in the best way I could. He had his problems, and it was a mounting pile of them as time went on. It was really hard for me. It scared me for myself. I wasn't even half as famous as he was, and I'm having my own weird stuff going on. Is this what it's like being famous? Because it's getting harder and serious and scarier to watch. Mrs. Producer bringing me a drink because I'm getting scratched.
Mrs. Producer. We gotta have that too.
Right. Kevin Farley. At the time of Tommy Boy, Chris was on his second year of sobriety. He already had a year under his belt. He was down to maybe 225 pounds, which was a pretty good weight for him. He could really, he could move really well in that movie, and it showed. That was probably the best he ever looked, and his sobriety was probably the best it had ever been. Everything was clicking on all levels. Fred Wolf. We weren't trying to write a movie about Chris and his dad, but I think a lot of it just subconsciously worked its way in there. And David Spade again. Looking back, it feels like it was a big hit, even though it wasn't. It did all right. It just has nice memories about it. It's the most talked about movie that I've ever had any part of, certainly, and that's the 90% because of Chris. Michael Ewing says, I have a tradition that I get all of the actors to sign my movie poster for me. So one day I gave Chris the Tommy Boy poster. He took it, signed it, and handed it back to me. And what it said cut straight to my heart and really surprised me. What he wrote on the poster was, quote, "Dear Michael, don't give up on me, Chris." That's a little
There's one of them
tearjerker.
tearjerker. Yeah, that's one of them. If
SNL.
you really look at his face in a lot of movies when he has serious parts that, where he gets serious, you can see pain in his eyes, man. You can see that he was very troubled and had a lot of things that he harbored. And so when you read things like that, it strikes you because you're like, man,
Right.
he just wanted to be loved.
Yeah, absolutely. And the further we get into this, you'll see that how that's the type of person he was. He kept a lot inside, and he would keep you at arm's length. So SNL started to slide at this point. In the fall of '94, as Chris Farley and David Spade flew back and forth from Toronto to film Tommy Boy, they returned each week to find the show slipping further and further into confusion and disrepair. David Mandel, after the All-Stars like Hartman left the show, it never seemed like a working cast so much as here's the Sandler sketch, here's the Farley sketch, here's the Spade sketch. All of a sudden, we were playing a football game with nothing but these special team guys out on the field. And that's not a team that's going to play well for a whole 4 quarters. And Lori Bagley says, while things were going well for Chris privately, SNL had continued to suffer, and it was clear that major structural changes were needed. Early in the year, reports had been begun to take aim at the show's shortcomings, and by season's end, the media had launched a full-fledged assault Particularly derogatory was a New York Magazine article by a reporter who had lived in and among the cast for several weeks. While the criticisms in piece were not wholly without merit, its perspective was rather myopic, and its tone was unrelentingly fool. The magazine's cover featured Chris wearing a television on his head, the poster boy for the death of SNL. And the headline of the piece, "Comedy Isn't Funny," wasn't exactly what Chris thought his legacy at the show would be. That damn media sometimes,
You,
it seems to be all the time these days.
everybody's a critic,
Right.
Especially when they're not doing it. You know what I'm saying?
Right. Everybody's got their 2 cents. Well, you should do it this way and you should do it that. Yeah, I know, right? Kevin Farley. I don't even know what word you would use to describe what happened at the end of the year, of that year. Weird, crazy. The whole place runs on rumors and innuendo, but Chris had a lot of meetings with his managers who told him he'd be fine stepping right into movies. I don't think Chris was fired and he didn't exactly quit. Mike Shoemaker, there's a sketch at the very end of Chris's last show written by Fred Wolf. Chris, Adam, Jay Moore, and all those guys playing themselves. It was the last sketch that these guys ever did on SNL. And I always remember it as sort of being a metaphor for them leaving the show. Everybody leaps into the polar bear pit, and one by one, they all get mauled and eaten alive. And that polar bear pit, Paramount immediately ordered up, in essence, Tommy Boy 2. No sequel ideas followed naturally out of Tommy Callahan's story, but that was no obstacle. The movie's basic formula was lifted, reupholstered, and set down in vaguely different circumstances, and Black Sheep was born. Tom Matheson. Chris wanted to hear anything and everything I could remember about Animal House. He wanted to get my take on the whole experience and what it was like working with Belushi. I liked to make him laugh, so I told him as many stories as I could. Chris had an innocence about him, a golly shucks gee kind of thing. John felt like an older brother. Chris felt like a younger brother. Chris had a very salt of the earth quality about him. When he introduced me to his brother, it was all about how great his brother was. Bruce McGill. Toward the end of the movie, we all play in a golf tournament. so we spend about 6 hours out there together. If you want to know something about a guy, go play golf with him. And while we were out there, we had a very protracted, involved three-way conversation about what had happened to John and how he, Chris, should avoid that for himself. It was fascinating to see how interested he was in Belushi and Belushi's demise, and how adamant he was that he would not go down that road. Cut to 2 years later, and he went exactly the same way. If there was ever a moth to a flame, whether it was conscious, unconscious, I don't know. Lori Bagley says, when Chris left SNL, he told me that the only goal he'd ever had in life was to be on that show, that his father had loved John Belushi on that show, and if he could make it there, he'd make his father happy. That's where the Belushi thing come from, his father. Lori Bagley, again, says, Chris and I were just emotional, crazy people. Our relationship was always rocky. Anytime you got close to him, if he'd let down his guard and really let you in, then he'd push you back out. As close as you got the night before, you'd be pushed that much further away the next morning. And that's unfortunate, that he was like that, because what a cool guy he was.
right?
Let's see where we at. Got a little ways to go
She's
there.
got if I'm correct, she's the one that Lori Begley. She's the one she didn't star in Tommy Boy. She was in Tommy Boy, the one that jumps in the swimming pool, right?
Honestly,
Because isn't she the one that Chris and David ended up having like a little?
yeah, that's coming up here, I believe.
Okay.
So maybe it'll.
I didn't know. I couldn't remember if that was her name or.
Okay, so
Because
then
I know that Lori Bagley girl had a big part in Chris's life. I know that.
right, and then there's Jillian Seeley. She
Jillian
also
Seeley.
did. She was the Kit Kat lady or whatever.
Okay.
I met Chris buying a cup of coffee. This is funny. I really didn't know who he was. I remember he had an Elmer Fudd hat on, and he was wearing those electrician glasses he had. He looked like he was mentally retarded. He asked me if I would marry him, and then he introduced himself. Hi, I'm Chris Farley. We ended up going to a restaurant that was open really late and just hanging, just laughing and talking all night. He told me a little bit about his problems, then he asked me if I would go to a meeting with him later that night. We went to the meeting and then out to dinner. We just clicked. From that day on, we started hanging out all the time. We laughed our asses off together. I've had friends who made me laugh and friends I could have really serious talks with, but I've never had all of that in the same person like I did with Chris. And John Farley says, none of us saw it coming. Ted Dondenville says, a rewrite of Ninja came back and it really sucked. For whatever reason, in the days before he left for New York, he started getting angry. Then the battery died on the camcorder halfway through the training session. Afterward, we went to look at it, and it was all effed up. Chris went into a rage, yelling and screaming and ranting about his G-damn script. He left Chicago really pissed off. Lori Bagley said, I picked him up in New York. The car came and got me, and I went to the airport to meet him. He got into the limousine, and as we drove off, started talking about work. And while we were talking, it was like a black cloud came over him. I saw the Chris I knew literally disappeared, just vanished into this distant world. I said, what's going on? But he had checked out. We went by the hotel and then got back in the car to go and have dinner. Chris was quiet for a moment. Then he turned to me and said, Kitten, I'm drinking tonight. Okay, so Lori Bagley's the kitten, Kit Kat lady.
Okay.
It's hard to remember all these people. Ted Dondenville,
Right.
that first relapse, that was the big one. The rest were just dominoes. And then my own little note, Chris had been sober for 3 years at a time when his commitment had never seemed stronger. He gave it all up with one drink on the flight from Chicago to New York. Chris's friends and family all asked the same question, why? Whatever precipitated the relapse had happened, and it was devastating. Lori Bagley, I started crying. No, you're not. I said, you're not going to do that, and you're not going to do it with me. Chris said, I've already started. That wasn't water I was drinking in the hotel. It was vodka, he told me. Tom Farley. Tom Farley said, Chris called me and said, Tommy, you want to go and see a sneak preview of Black Sheep in New Jersey? I said, sure. He was staying at the Four Seasons, so I stopped up there. He looked fine to me. The limo was going to pick us up in any second, and Chris was getting into the mini bar, filling his pockets with little bottles. I said, Chris, what are you doing? Oh, I'm just getting a couple of these for the limo driver, he said. They like that. He began sneaking off to the bathroom often to take drinks. I didn't put two and two together until I got a call from Dad saying, what the hell happened? What do you mean? Chris trashed his hotel room at the Four Seasons and did $3,000 worth of damage, and then it was back to rehab. And Kevin Farley says, when I got the call in Chicago that he had relapsed, it was devastating. Those 3 years were his crowning achievement. Jillian Seeley. He called me early in the morning on New Year's Eve. He said, hey, it's Chris. Hey, I said, why haven't you called me? I was pissed. I relapsed. You're lying, I said. I don't believe you. He said, I really want to see you. Will you come and meet me at a meeting? There was a meeting that morning. I went with him. He told me about the relapse and the screening. He said that he'd effing hated Black Sheep, that it was just Tommy Boy II, only worse. So that was another thing that we get into here is that a lot of the acting stuff that he was doing, he was starting to get tired of it. He didn't want to do it. He was basically he was being used, kind of
Right.
like Elvis was with that jerk
Yeah.
off.
They wanted him for one thing, and he wanted to expand his, he wanted more serious roles, and
Because
they felt that, yeah.
he was actually very capable of being serious too, as well. There's a little bit in here that talks about that. Ted Donenville said Beverly Hills Ninja was a script that had been around and around. Several stars had turned it down. Chris himself had passed on it a number of times. Following his stint in rehab, Chris flew to Hollywood in January of '96 and started production on the film. He stayed clean throughout the shoot, but the change in him was obvious to everyone on the set. His anxiety was rapidly eclipsing his boisterous amiability, and the strength and serenity he'd possessed just a few weeks before it all but vanished. After that first relapse, he was very different. It changed him. After the second, third, and fourth, they were all kind of the same. The whole time we were shooting Ninja, there were no problems whatsoever. He had the first relapse before shooting, the second after. And Brad Jinkle. Principal photography on Beverly Hills Ninja wrapped in March of '96. Chris relapsed a second time and returned to Hazelden, Minnesota. It was a frustrating time. Chris would maintain his sobriety for 6 weeks, 2 months at a stretch, then head angrily back to the starting line and begin again. So now he's in this cycle where he's going back and forth, getting sober, drinking again.
Right.
Tim O'Malley says, Chris said, I'm going to be here in Chicago for a while. If I keep checking in with you, will you help me? I took it as a request for sponsorship. He didn't specifically ask me to sponsor him or spell it out like that, but I could tell he wanted help. So for a few weeks, he'd call me. I'd pick him up and take him out to meetings. He started to get it. He started to get it again. He was happy and it was fun, and we could crack jokes and make fun of each other just like we used to. And then he stopped calling. After staying clean during the principal photography of Edwards and Hunt, he relapsed again in September and, with varying degrees of failure, cycled through 3 separate rehab facilities over the next 2 months. John Farley. One day we had lunch at a restaurant on the top of the mountain. While we were eating, Chris started crying, saying, I can't stop, I just can't stop. He was crying his eyes out right in the restaurant. Chris wore his heart on his sleeve. He didn't care one bit if he was crying in public, but people were starting to recognize him. We were like, okay, we've got to get Chris Farley off this mountain right now. Bob Odenkirk says, I'd seen Chris effed up before, but this time he looked as bad as anyone had ever looked. It was a horrible thing to watch. It's one thing to shake your finger at a friend and say you're going to kill yourself. It's another thing to look at him and know he's going to do it. So now we're getting, closer to that point where he's doing it, unfortunately.
Right.
Tom Farley says, as soon as he heard little bits and pieces about Arbuckle's life, he said, this is me. Chris was going to do a dramatic film, a biopic of Fatty Arbuckle. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle was a silent film star bigger in his day than Charlie Chaplin. It was the whole idea that nobody understands the real person underneath. I'm going to tell them about the real Fatty Arbuckle, and maybe they'll understand the real Chris Farley. And now we get into a little bit of Shrek for those of you that didn't know. This is very interesting.
Which I was gonna just say that the thing about Fatty Arbuckle was not a commonly known thing. I didn't even know about that until reading the book, and still to this day, I have not read that in any other article or anything about Chris other than that book. So the Shrek thing is more widely known, especially in this year. I've seen a lot coming out about it.
Yeah, so after we go through this, for anyone interested, I encourage you to look up. You can look up side by sides of Chris Farley doing Shrek along with Mike Myers, and I'll tell you, Chris Farley would have been perfect for Shrek. He was not so much look like him, like our old buddy Ron, but
Oh yeah.
he was the personality for sure. So on Shrek, Brian Dennehy, Chris was Jeffrey Ratzenberg's first choice to play the title role. According to everyone involved, Chris Farley's Shrek was one of the funniest, most heartfelt performances he ever gave. Tragically, no one has ever heard it at the time this book was written. Terry Rossio says Chris was the number one choice, and everyone was thrilled that he agreed to the project. For an animated feature, his voice was perfect, very distinctive. Also, Shrek kind of looked like Farley, or Farley looked like Shrek. And then I put rest in peace, our buddy Ron Romanowski. Brett and I had a friend. He was my age. He's got me into playing blues guitar and stuff. Long story, but he died a few years back, unfortunately. Car accident. We were about the same age. He looked like Shrek, and he didn't like it when you said that, but it was funny.
Yeah, I called him. I told him he looked like Shrek one time, and we'll just leave it at that because
Right.
he didn't think it was too funny.
No, he
Let me tell you something, you little mother.
That was
Call
him
me
too.
Shrek again, boy. I'll show you Shrek.
He was a damn powerhouse too. He was. Anyways, Andrew Adamson says by the time he finished voicing Shrek in early May, Chris's ability to maintain his sobriety had all but vanished. His relapses started coming randomly, suddenly, and with alarming frequency. After presenting at the Oscars on March 24th, Chris had returned to rehab in Alabama, emerging sober to work on Shrek in April and early May. June and July were spent in and mostly out of rehab, and by August, the situation was catastrophic. Friends who were active in Chris's recovery, like Jillian Seeley and Tim O'Malley, did their best to keep him on the straight and narrow, but their efforts were increasingly frustrated. Chris had never let the trappings of fame and success put any distance between him and his loved ones, but addiction finally succeeded where fame could not. Tom Farley said, "I always told Chris, you love humor, but look around at the people you're with when you're doing these drugs. These people have no humor in their lives. You keep this up, and you will end up surrounded by people who are not your friends." And that's exactly what happened. Father Tom Gannon said, "You cannot understand Chris Farley without grappling with the relationship between him and his father. That was the dominant force in his life. He talked to his father every day on the phone and was constantly trying to please him. And I think he did please him. But the family, which looked so normal on the outside, was terribly dysfunctional." John Farley said, "Then there's the other element to it, not wanting to get skinny or sober because he didn't want his dad to feel bad. Chris said that to me, that he should stay heavy for dad." Pretty sad.
Yeah, that part got me because it's like, I mean, as a young man looking up to their dad, I know that there's a lot of things that I wanted to do because you did it, and
Right.
just like, so having it be that way, and like the aspect of wanting to remain heavy because his dad was, that's heartbreaking because it's like, man,
Yep.
that's a whole life choice and not a
Right.
good one.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty normal. Obviously, for all of us,
Right.
I was the same way. Wanted to be. I idolized my dad as a child. And through the, I mean, it's different for all of us. I get it, but we all have that to an extent.
Oh yeah.
Sharna Halpern said, listening to the song "Father and Son" by Cat Stevens, Chris started crying, cried and cried and cried. He said, "I love my dad so much, and I don't want him to die." I said, "He probably feels the same way about you. You're both in the same situation. You're both alcoholics. You're both overweight. Maybe you can help each other." "Yeah, but we can't," he said. "It'll never happen." Father Tom Gannon says, trying to keep the tears back on that one. The father
Of
was
course.
Father Tom Gannon says the father was in denial, but in all fairness, I don't think the brothers were straight with the father either. The father never accepted that Chris was a drug addict until the very end, even though the two of them talked every day. So there was a lot of posturing going on. Lori Bagley says Chris knew that to be himself, to be healthy, and he'd have to pull away from the family, and he couldn't do it. He said he couldn't do it. Chris Rock said he was so effing drunk to the point where he was being rude and grabby with girls. I remember dropping him off at his apartment. He wanted me to come up and see his place, and I just didn't have it in me. He was so effed up, I just couldn't go up there. And as I drove away, I know it had gotten to that point. I knew that that was the last time I'd ever see him alive. Jillian Seeley said, Chris got on the phone. I'm really scared. He said, I totally relapsed on Sunday and went back to treatment. And they made me come here. Will you come and see me? So I went over to Northwestern, a psych ward. I went up to Chris's room and I heard him go, hey, hey, in here. He was in the bathroom, blowing a cigarette smoke into the air vent. I looked down at the stainless steel paper towel rack, and there were lines of cocaine on it. Chris had gotten one of the hospital staff to bring him coke in the detox ward. Unbelievable.
Right.
Tom Farley says no one talked about it, and that was the problem. My parents' reaction was always the same. Chris is out of control, or damn it, how could he do this? He's going to ruin his career. But Chris wasn't out of control. He was sick, and his sickness was just so deep and so entrenched. And Lori Bagley says, Chris told me that every time you do heroin, you can feel it take a part of your soul.
Yeah,
Um,
that's scary shit right there.
it is scary, and just to touch on the addiction part of it, you and I have experienced, unfortunately, with some things on those levels, and yeah, it's what he
Oh
said
yeah.
there. You can feel it take a part of your soul, basically.
Anthony says, yes, sir. My father passed back in 2018. I and my father have identical resemblance as you and your old man does.
Oh, easy there.
Yeah, no, we're identical, eh?
Right. Uh,
Well, I don't know about that, Doc, but
well, for those of you still here, man, we appreciate you. We truly
Yeah,
appreciate you
absolutely.
hanging
We've
out.
had a pretty
This,
good, steady little group here.
it's yeah,
Looks like
it's nice. We appreciate it. We still have some pages. This
most
is
definitely.
actually a little longer than normal on this one. Oh well, so we hope you'll stick around for a little longer.
Right.
Um, so after the yeah, after Chris told Lori about the doing heroin, it takes a little part of your soul. Chris Farley says the notion of love is something that would be a wonderful thing. I don't think I've ever experienced it other than the love of my family. At this point, it's something beyond my grasp, but I can imagine it, and longing for it makes me sad. And so in January of 97, Chris Farley had the #1 movie in America and a 90-day sobriety chip of which he could rightly be proud. A mere 7 months later, all of that seemed an impossible memory. On September 10th, Chris's part in Dirty Work wrapped and it was back to Promises in Malibu. By this point, he had cycled through a dozen rehab facilities in under 22 months, and the routine treatments had reached the point of diminishing returns. In truth, no one could keep Chris on track but Chris, but there was one place where he had managed to stay sober and happy. His old job at SNL. Mark Gervitz called SNL producer Lorne Michaels. They agreed to having Chris come back to the host might help him in some way to deal with his problems. But the week Chris arrived in New York, he wasn't just having problems, he was having a full-blown meltdown. The results, broadcast live on national television for millions to see, were not pretty. Kevin Farley. So
Yep.
I don't know of those who were watching it ever seen any of that stuff, but yeah,
Yes, I personally have seen it. And you can tell that his voice is all blown out. He's been, I mean,
right.
I've had it happen as an alcoholic. You wake up and you've been screaming or whatever is the case, and he was raspy and just you can tell he's strung out, and yeah, it's sad to see.
Yeah, very sad. So it gets a little more sadder along the way here as we get toward the end. Kevin Farley says when Chris finally showed up high on heroin after these 3 days missing, Leif Garrett came into the house and was like, "Your brother's so effing funny, man. I almost took him out right there, but I was so sad and spent with the whole situation that I just didn't have the energy to punch him in the face." He
Hmm.
was planning on carrying the party right on to New York. It rolled right into SNL, and the result was a complete disaster. Molly Shannon said he was just indulging in everything: girls, Chinese food, drugs, booze, cold syrup, everything. Tom Farley said, excuse me, it was Tuesday night at about 5 o'clock. I was working up in Greenwich, and I knew he was coming out to New York. I called my wife and I said, "This is weird. He's been here since Sunday and he hasn't even called me." I called up Kevin Cleary and told him about Chris, that he was just a mess. Kevin said to come back down to the city. We'd take Chris to lunch and have yet another intervention. So I left work, drove in. Kevin and I went to the Waldorf at around 11:30 and called up to the room. Chris answered the phone. I said, "Hey, I'm down in the lobby. It's me and Kevin Cleary." And as soon as he heard those two names, he knew what was up. Chris said, "Yeah, I'm just waking up. Give me 20 minutes." We waited a half hour or so, called back up to his room, and there was a do not disturb on his phone line. Kevin and I went out and had lunch and talked about what we could do, and that was it. I never saw him alive again. Whew. Lauren Michaels said, following his week in New York, Chris returned to Los Angeles to find that Kevin had moved out, refusing to enable his brother's addiction any longer. Understanding Kevin's need to protect his own sobriety, Chris let it go without any confrontation. Other than a brief visit at Thanksgiving, the two brothers would never speak to each other again. Lori Bagley said Chris knew what he had to do. He knew what he had to do to stay sober, and he chose not to do it. He told me why. He made me promise that I would never tell anyone why, and I never will. But maybe 3 months before he died, he was in a rehab in L.A. He called me late one night and told me why he wasn't going to stay sober anymore. And at that point, we both knew what that meant. Father Tom Gannon said, "We both agreed that the rehab programs were getting him nowhere. I think he went to every rehab known to man. He must have spent about $500,000 on them. He had all the lingo down, but he didn't have the reality down. People have to internalize those 12 steps and make them their own, and Chris wasn't doing that. Tom Arnold says, there was an opportunity to cut Chris's money off at the end. You can commit somebody, legally commit them, and cut them off all their access to their funds. It came up with the people at Brillstein Gray. They proposed it, but you have to get the family signed off on it. Ultimately, it was his father's decision, and his father wouldn't go along. That's a tough one.
Yeah.
Because as you know, and as any addict knows, no one can make you get clean.
No,
You
you
know,
have to want to.
and if you taking something away from it, maybe it would have worked, I guess. But I mean, when you do that to somebody, they're going to have some serious hatred and anguish toward you for that. So,
Right. Yeah.
it's like, what do you do? Tim O'Malley said the last 10 days of his life, he called me every day. It was a slow, horrible thing. He'd call at 5, 6 in the morning and plead with me to meet him at the pump room. He kept saying, please, I need your help. I need your spiritual guidance. I'm speaking with Chris about the Fatty Arbuckle movie. Oh, in speaking with Chris about the Fatty Arbuckle movie. The Fatty Arbuckle movie is not a reality, I said. It's just a script at your desk. You've got to learn how to not drink. Nothing else comes before that. But it's different for me. I'm famous. Bullshit, you're no different from me. You're just an Irish effer who can't stop drinking. This movie is not real. What's real is your torture. You've got to start from ground zero and fix it. And I can't do it again. Chris said, I'm sorry. Chris said, I can't do it again. Yes, you can. But my dad says, F your dad. And that's where I left it. That Fatty Arbuckle movie, that was the line in the sand. Either you get sober or you get dead. Now we're in the last days. It gets a little tough here. A few more pages, fellas. And again, we appreciate you all tuning in, man. It's been a little bit longer.
Absolutely. Yes, I'm very thankful for you guys because I haven't really I've seen maybe one or two people leave, but we've been pretty much at a steady 5 viewers.
Very cool. We appreciate you guys. So now we're into Chris's last days. As Tuesday night surrendered into Sunday morning, Chris's host offered to hire a call girl for him. Chris went with the escort back to her apartment where they were joined by another friend, quote unquote. There they continued to smoke crack and snort heroin for several hours. They ended up going back to Chris's apartment in the Hancock Center. At this point, Chris hadn't slept in 4 days. Chris and the escort began arguing over money. Around 3 in the morning, she decided to leave, collected her things, and headed for the door. Chris stood up to follow her and collapsed in the middle of his living room. She turned around, walked back over, and knelt down next to him. This is tough, man. He was having trouble breathing. She stole his watch, took pictures of his body, stood up, and walked away. Before passing out, his last words to her were, "Don't leave me." On her way out, believing Chris to be safely unconscious, she stepped by a side table in the foyer. She took out a pen and a piece of paper and left him a short note saying that he was just so fun. And she'd had such a lovely time. What a POS.
Yeah.
John Farley says, Teddy and I walked and saw him on the floor. At first, of course, I thought he was joking. Then I realized he wasn't. I dropped to the ground beside him and started giving him CPR. That didn't work. I turned to Ted and told him to call 911. He ran to the phone and called for an ambulance. He told them it was for Chris Farley. That was a mistake. The paramedics arrived. They tried to revive him, but they couldn't do anything. When they pronounced Chris dead, Teddy knelt down and put a rosary in his hand. Ted Dondenville. The media reports all said that no illegal drugs were found in Chris's apartment, just a few prescription antidepressants. That's not exactly true. While the cops were sweeping the apartment, anytime they came across something illegal, a baggie of cocaine maybe, they'd come over, quietly slip it to me and say, "Here." Essentially, they got rid of the evidence. They were cops, but they were Chicago cops. Chris was dead. Anything illegal he'd been doing was beside the point. Let him rest in peace. John Farley said, They put him in a body bag and took him out. I stayed in the back room, so I didn't see what was going on. Teddy was handling it. Tom Farley said, I was at a meeting at a friend's talking about some business ventures. In his office, he had a TV with CNN on in the background, muted. I looked over and I saw Chris and David Spade in a clip from the movies. I said, oh, that's Chris, turn it up. He turned the volume on, and just as he did, they switched to the scene in front of the Hancock. My friend stood up, handed me his phone, and said, take as long as you need. The funeral was 2 days before Christmas. Julian Seeley said, everyone was saying you had to have seen it coming, but Chris was so full of life that you just wouldn't think that he would die. I said to Adam Sandler, this just don't seem real. Yeah, he said, I keep expecting him to open up the coffin and be okay. Kevin Farley said, we all knew Dad wouldn't be too long to follow. I think even he knew it. He closed down the business, paid off the mortgage, made sure all of his insurance was in order. When you wake up in the morning, what gets you through the day is your hopes and dreams for tomorrow. For Dad, a lot of that was gone after Chris died. He couldn't find it again. They say that happens when you bury a child. I would have long talks with him, and he was just confused about the whole thing, wondering why it had happened, asking God why it happened. It was such a shock that if it left him in a daze for the rest of his life, he just sat in his chair, staring out the window. But from that day until the day he died, a little over a year later, he never picked up the bottle again. One more page, fellas, for those that stuck with us. We appreciate it. And it sure is a heart-wrenching story.
I wasn't crying. You were crying.
It wasn't me.
Yeah.
So Ian Maxstone Graham said, there's that one moment where Chris says to Paul McCartney on a Chris Farley show, remember when you were in the Beatles and you did that album, Abbey Road, and at the very end of the song it goes, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make? You remember that? Yes, is that true? And McCartney says, yes, Chris, in my experience it is. I've found that the more you give, the more you get. And Chris is just like awesome. And in that moment, Chris isn't acting at all. It's really Chris tapping into that quiet, needy part of himself. You see it up there on the stage. What you see in that sketch is the actual Chris Farley being happy that the actual Paul McCartney is telling him that there's an infinite amount of love in the world, and that someday that love will come back to him. Whew, sorry guys, that one's pretty rough.
Oh yeah, got me for sure.
The epilogue. Although the last days of Chris's life in Chicago had been toxic and frenzied, at some point along the way it arrested his downward spiral and paused to do his holiday shopping. Now this one will get you. So he'd paused to do holiday shopping amongst this chaos and his binging, picking out special presents for his parents and his siblings, handwriting personal notes to accompany each specially wrapped box. And so on Christmas Eve, only 2 days after burying their son, the Farley family sat around the tree in their living room and opened their final presents from Chris. He'd bought his mother 2 small ceramic clowns. On January 2nd, 1998, the office of the Cook County Medical Examiner issued an autopsy report in the case of Chris's death. It stated that he had died of opiate and cocaine intoxication with coronary atherosclerosis as a significant contributing condition. Chris's body tested positive for cocaine and morphine, metabolized heroin, as well as traces of marijuana and the prescription antidepressant Prozac. No alcohol was found in his system at the time, but his liver showed signs of significant damage from years of drinking. Blockages of 50 to 90% were found in his major coronary arteries from years of unhealthy eating. The report ruled his death an accident. During the year after Chris's funeral, the health of his father, Tom Farley Sr., deteriorated rapidly. Chris's death had forced him to stop drinking, but the damage had largely been done. Morbid obesity and liver failure left him severely debilitated, and soon his condition was exacerbated by a bad fall. In March of '99, he checked into a hospital. After several days of constant vigil, Tom asked his family to go home and rest while he did the same. He died 3 hours later at the age of 63 years old. On Friday, August 26th, 2005, the Foley family joined several luminaries from Chris's life: Adam Sandler, Daniel Spade, Chris Rock, Tom Arnold, Sarah Silverman, Peter Segal, Bernie Brillstein, and more, as they unveiled Chris's star, the 2289th on Hollywood's Walk of Fame. Rest in peace, Christopher Crosby Farley. February 15th, 1964 to December 18th, 1997. I got through it.
Holy crap. Yeah, that definitely got me. The same thing happened when I read it.
Yeah,
Dory was sitting next to me and welling up, man. She's like, "You all right?" And I'm like, "You don't know, okay? You don't know. You're not reading it right now." And yeah, it'll get you,
it's tough.
especially if you're a fan. And like you said, I take it as a compliment, that he reminds, or I remind you of him in ways. And as I read that book, I sensed a lot of similarities between him and I. Um, I do know that it was kind of odd that one of the times he relapsed, unfortunately, it happened so many times. His 90 days was his 90 days was on St. Patrick's Day, which was
Oh, really?
my 90 days. So um that was cool. But I kept it in the back of my mind, man. I'm like, I know what he did and I'm not gonna do it,
Right.
but it's very sad the way things happened to him. And as there was obviously so many things that you did great with the notes. I mean, there wasn't anything that I could think of that you missed. But there's
Okay.
just so much in that book that's so great, and I definitely recommend it to anyone, fan or not. Just like the Elvis book, even if you're not that big of a fan, you might be after you read it.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's an amazing story, and I give all the credit, obviously, to the book. I'm only reading what those people wrote, their experiences with. Obviously, we didn't know Chris Farley, but the picture that's
Right,
painted, just like the Elvis book, he was obviously like the rest of us. He's a flawed human being, but he was an amazing person. That addiction really, really, and that's just terribly sad that he couldn't stop, and he wasn't gonna at that point.
right.
He
It
is
makes you
what it
wonder
is.
what his reason was. I respect
Right,
that person for keeping that private, and
right,
a lot of people wouldn't do that, but it makes you wonder. I mean, it had to have been a good enough reason for the person to just be like, "Wow." I mean,
right.
what do you say at that point?
Yeah. So, on that note, we have stepped over our hour a little bit here, and we appreciate everybody for tuning in.
Yes, very, very much,
And
guys.
so next week, at this point, the schedule is we will have an old buddy of ours, a singer named Tyler Ruski, on. He's actually from Marlette, Michigan. And hopefully, if that doesn't pan out, well, we've always got backups, but I believe he'll be here. Last time unfortunately, his son got in a car accident and he had to bail at the last minute. So that's the plan now for next week. For those of you interested in meeting him, we'll go over our vocalists again with him. And I'm hoping the following week we can get Glenn Brook on. We're not sure yet. Can't count on that yet just because I'm waiting to hear back from her. But she's been in communication with me and making sure she really wants to come on. She says, thanks for the opportunity. I'm like, well, it's our opportunity.
Right.
So we thank you.
Right. Yeah, we are honored and appreciate every guest that we have. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, with that being said, guys, we are going to call this one so I can get this edited and added to the collection. And we appreciate all of you for joining. And we will see
Absolutely.
you, well, a little bit of In My Words and Brett's thing. You'll see us separate, and then you'll see us back together next week for sure on Sunday, God willing. We will see you then.
Absolutely.
Peace from Grovetown, Georgia.
Peace from Peck, Michigan.
I feel that shine through the window. be the new